Bernie Sanders scores a clear victory in the New Hampshire primary, cementing his position amongst progressive voters. The former Vice President Joe Biden, meanwhile, says he's just getting started after coming in a distant fifth. Passengers on board the Diamond Princess cruise ship off the coast of Japan remain in limbo after 175 people test positive for the coronavirus, the largest cluster outside mainland China. And Ankara warns of a heavy price for any attacks carried out on its forces in Syria. Recep Tayyip Erdogan adding Turkey will use whatever means necessary to push Syrian government forces out of Idlib. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. Polls have closed in the U.S. state of New Hampshire after voters there cast their ballots for who should be the Democratic Party nominee to take on Donald Trump. Results indicate a win for progressive Senator Bernie Sanders, with former mayor of South Bend Pete Buttigieg coming in second. Amy Klobuchar came in third place, while Elizabeth Warren finished fourth. But perhaps the biggest shocker of the night was former Vice President Joe Biden, who based his campaign on his electability, coming in a distant fifth. Brian Quinn reports.
Bernie Sanders out in front of the Democratic presidential field. The progressive Vermont senator claiming victory as New Hampshire voters cast their ballots in the Democratic Party primary Tuesday.
This victory here is the beginning of the end for Donald Trump.
Sanders with a narrow lead over moderate former small-town mayor Pete Buttigieg, a welcome result for his campaign after last week's chaotic Iowa caucuses saw the two candidates neck and neck amid a botched vote tally. Buttigieg tried to maintain his momentum, fired up supporters as results rolled in.
Thanks to you, a campaign that some said shouldn't be here at all has shown that we are here to stay.
Coming in third place with a surprisingly strong finish, Senator Amy Klobuchar of Minnesota, following a fifth-place finish in Iowa. Klobuchar acknowledging that her campaign had beaten the odds.
What we've been is steady, we've been strong, and we've never quit. We redefined the word grit.
Further downfield, two Democratic Party titans, each once seen as the race's frontrunner. Senator Elizabeth Warren of neighboring Massachusetts had hoped for a strong showing, her fourth-place finish reflective of a steep drop in the polls in recent weeks. Even worse, former Vice President Joe Biden. After finishing a disappointing fourth in Iowa, Biden dropped to fifth in New Hampshire, his campaign counting on African-American and Latino voters to revive it.
99.9%. That's the percentage of African-American voters who have not yet had a chance to vote in America.
The candidates now look ahead to caucuses in Nevada and the South Carolina primary to either build or regain momentum ahead of the Super Tuesday slate of primaries in early March.
For more on this story, we can bring in our chief foreign editor, Rob Parsons. Rob, is the writing on the wall for Bernie Sanders? Will he end up being the nominee for the Democratic Party?
Well, it certainly looks like it at the moment. You know, he's certainly, no question about it, the front runner now. That's been turned around over the last week. At the end of last week, he was still running second nationally to Joe Biden. The beginning of this week, even before the New Hampshire primary, he was a close second. Now he's overtaken him, and it looks like Bernie Sanders is on as you suggested, on a run now towards nomination. Whether anybody else will be able to challenge him is a different matter. But at the moment, Bernie Sanders is way out in front. He's demonstrated his ability to bring out people. He says that down the road he can invigorate, give hope to young people, get them to come out on the road as well. It may change when it gets to new territory, Nevada and South Carolina. But last time round, 2016, he did pretty well in Nevada as well. And he's got that bounce now. He's got the media talking about him. He's got plenty of money in his coffers. He's got the best organisation out there at the moment. So it really is looking good for him. And interestingly too, I think, and perhaps crucially for him, the one challenger on the progressive side, the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, Elizabeth Warren, falling behind. He seems to be taking the vote away from her. And if that's the case, that's only going to become more so the further we go down the road towards the nomination.
Let's talk about another man, Pete Buttigieg, who was doing pretty well after, Iowa. The Iowa caucus was held. And now you have Amy Klobuchar coming in third. She's doing pretty well as well.
Yeah, I mean, in an odd way, that works in the favour of Bernie Sanders as well, because they're essentially splitting the moderate vote, the centre vote. It's difficult to see either of them running the whole way to the nomination to compete against Bernie Sanders. Amy got what?
Klobuchar.
Klobuchar got 20% of the vote, came third in New Hampshire. Okay, it was an achievement, but it's not something that's going to see her through to the nomination. She's got to do really well in Nevada and South Carolina. It's difficult to see her doing that. Same with Pete Buttigieg as well. He's done well in two states.
Predominantly white
two
states.
Very small states where the population, in both cases, is 90% white. Yeah. Going into areas where the African-American community is big, where the Latino community is big, where there are a lot of blue-collar workers which have shown no inclination for voting for him so far, it's going to be really tough down the road.
Okay, let's address the elephant in the room now. Joe Biden.
Joe Biden.
What's happening to Joe Biden?
Sleepy Joe, as Donald Trump calls him. Well, that essentially is the problem, I think. He's not really shown the vigour or come across with a message, a central message that really connects with the voters. With Bernie Sanders, you've got that. You understand what he's about. And he's got the energy. Joe Biden doesn't seem to have the energy or a really clear message.
He just wants to bring back dignity to the presidency, but he's not laying out clear ideas like, as you said, Bernie Sanders is.
Yeah, having said all that, though, he's not giving up clearly, but it does not look good. If you'd come second or third even, one could have said he's still got a pretty good chance. But to come fourth in Iowa, then fifth in New Hampshire, and not get any delegates at all, single figure vote in his favour, 9% I think it was, Okay, so he's got a much better chance in Nevada and South Carolina where the demographic works for him, but he's going to have to do really well. A second place won't do it for him. He's got to win, and he's got to win convincingly to get that bounce to take him into Super Tuesday on March the 3rd and to go forward with real hope and to convince people, and this is what's most important, that he's got what it takes to convince the media so they start talking about him and playing him up, and most importantly, to convince the donors, because if he doesn't get donors giving him money, he's not going to be able to compete all the way to the nomination.
Because speaking of Super Tuesday, you have somebody with very deep pockets who's already there.
Waiting in the wings. Yeah,
waiting in the wings.
Yeah.
Thank you very much for that, Rob Parsons there. In other news, China's senior medical advisor is predicting the coronavirus outbreak may be over by April. This just a day after the head of the World Health Organization said countries should be treating the virus as enemy number one. 44,000 people are infected by the pneumonia-like virus, the majority in mainland China. Now, passengers on board the Diamond Princess cruise ship in Yokohama, Japan, remain in limbo after 175 people tested positive, the largest cluster outside China. And Erin Ogunke reports.
It's one of the last scenarios one imagines when booking a cruise vacation, and perhaps one of the most nightmarish. Docked in Yokohama, Japan, the cruise liner Diamond Princess now has the largest cluster of COVID-19 cases outside China. More than 3,000 people remain in isolation on board as the number of confirmed infections continues to rise.
We have found new cases of the coronavirus after 53 examinations. 39 of them are confirmed to be positive. So we would like to transport them to medical facilities as soon as the ship docks.
Among the newly confirmed cases, a quarantine officer charged with checking the health of passengers and crew. Those who test positive for the virus are removed from the ship and transported to the hospital, while those on board are largely confined to their rooms. They are permitted to walk on deck for just a few minutes per day and must regularly monitor their own temperatures. Some health experts, however, question the efficiency and even the safety of the measure. Japanese authorities do not have the resources to test all of the passengers, many of whom are particularly vulnerable.
There are many elderly passengers on board. Some of them have cardiac diseases and high blood pressure. Their health is not good. The situation is likely to further harm their health.
The Japanese government is now considering allowing elderly and sick passengers to disembark before the quarantine is scheduled to end on February 19th.
Now, Ankara is warning of a heavy price for any attacks carried out on its forces. This after a Syrian military helicopter was shot down by Turkish fighters. The latest flare-up in violence comes as government forces battle rebels in the northwest of Syria. President Bashar al-Assad's offensive to retake the last rebel-held stronghold has resulted in an exodus of nearly 700,000 civilians.
Under moody skies, trucks piled high with belongings and people in Idlib region, all fleeing north from another Syrian government offensive on several fronts.
I'm going to Afrin. It's a safe area because the Turkish army is there. We're going there, but we're also afraid that the regime will bomb that area too.
Along with Russian support, Damascus has squeezed Syria's northwest over the last 2 months, bombing towns and cities, destroying infrastructure like badly needed health services. It's the last remaining opposition enclave, and with nowhere else to turn, civilians are fleeing to wherever they can find shelter. Some 700,000 are already on the move, the numbers adding to over 6 million displaced inside Syria, raising the spectre of a midwinter humanitarian crisis.
Many have had to flee already several times, leaving behind possessions and with limited places for them to stay. There is snow, rain and wind, and it feels like below zero in terms of the temperatures. So this has already exacerbated the dire humanitarian conditions and will continue throughout the week.
Adding to major concerns is just how Turkey is reacting. To Syria's north, it's already hosting over 3 million refugees and has closed its borders to fresh arrivals. With a military presence of its own in northern Syria, Ankara's responded with force to Damascus's attacks, pinning the newly displaced between two fronts on rapidly shrinking safe ground.
Now, the Palestinian president went before the United Nations Security Council to reject Donald Trump's Middle East peace plan. Mahmoud Abbas called the so-called win-win deal a gift to the Israelis. He pointed out at a map to what would eventually be a Palestinian state, saying it looked like Swiss cheese. Monty Francis reports.
At the UN Security Council, Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas waved a map representing the Trump administration's vision for a two-state solution, calling it a gift to Israel.
Here is the summary of the project which was presented. Here is what we expect as a state. It looks like Swiss cheese. Who among you would accept such a situation?
The Swiss cheese Abbas is referring to is the state carved out for Palestinians, the map reflecting a series of holes in the West Bank, or Israeli settlements, long considered illegal under international law. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu was quick to respond.
This is not Swiss cheese. It's the best plan that exists for the Middle East, for the State of Israel, and for the Palestinians too.
The Palestinians had no part in drafting the White House plan, a 3-year effort spearheaded by Trump's advisor and son-in-law, Jared Kushner. Hours after addressing the UN, Abbas held a news conference alongside former Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Olmert, saying he's willing to resume talks on a proposal from 2008 when Olmert was still in office, far more generous to the Palestinian side. While Trump has called his plan the deal of the century, thousands are taking to the streets to oppose it, reflecting the results of a newly released poll showing that 94% of Palestinians are against Trump's Mideast initiative.
That's it from me, but you can follow all the stories we're tracking for you on our website. The address is france24.com. There you can see Bernie Sanders coming out on top in the New Hampshire primary, while the former Vice President Joe Biden came in at a distant 5th. Stay tuned. This is France 24.